After 5 years of cruelty with my ex-husband, a millionaire CEO swept me into a world of love. Welcome to the channel. I'm so happy to have you here today. I truly appreciate you taking the time to join me. It means so much. Before we dive into today's story, I just want to take a moment to send you some love and blessings. May you always find happiness. May your heart be filled with peace. And may all your dreams come true. Now, if you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my future stories. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please drop a comment below and let me know. It's always exciting to hear from people all over the world. Now, stay with me till the very end, because this story is going to touch your heart and leave you feeling inspired and uplifted. All right, let's get into it. Laura Mitchell was the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. Her smooth brown skin glowed like honey under the sunlight, flawless and radiant, a natural beauty that needed no enhancement. Her long, stylish braids cascaded down her back, each strand meticulously woven, a testament to both her patience and elegance. Her brown eyes, deep and captivating, held an almost hypnotic warmth, the kind of gaze that made people stop mid-sentence, unsure whether they were looking at a woman or a masterpiece. Laura was not only beautiful on the outside, her heart was just as stunning. She had a quiet grace about her, the type of woman who could soothe a crying child with a single smile or make an anxious friend feel calm with nothing but her presence. From a young age, Laura believed in love, the kind of pure, magical love that made people sacrifice everything for each other. She had been raised by parents who adored each other, and growing up watching them hold hands and exchange sweet glances made her dream of having the same kind of connection. Laura was not just beautiful, she was kind, generous, and intelligent. She carried herself with poise and confidence, never needing validation from others to know her worth. Yet, beneath that confident exterior, she was a woman with a fragile heart, longing for someone to see her, truly see her, and love her for who she was. When Scott entered her life, it felt like destiny. He was charming, confident, and seemed to know exactly what to say to make her heart race. His blue eyes sparkled when he smiled at her, and his deep, masculine voice made her feel like the most desirable woman in the world. Scott made her believe that her dreams of love were finally coming true. He swept her off her feet with romantic dates, thoughtful gestures, and promises of a future filled with happiness. When he proposed to her under a starry sky with a ring that sparkled almost as brightly as her eyes, Laura thought she had found her forever. Their wedding was beautiful, the kind of event that people talked about for months afterward. Laura walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, her heart bursting with joy as she met Scott's gaze at the altar. The vows they exchanged felt sacred, and when Scott kissed her, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. The honeymoon was just as magical: sandy beaches, candlelit dinners, and endless whispers of love under the moonlight. Laura genuinely believed that she had stepped into the life she had always dreamed of. But dreams have a way of unraveling when reality sets in. The first cracks appeared slowly, almost too subtle to notice at first. Scott began to change after the wedding. His sweet compliments became rare, his warm smiles replaced by cold indifference. Laura brushed it off, thinking he was just adjusting to married life. But then the teasing started. Subtle at first, but cruel beneath the surface. "You'd look better if you weren't so dark," Scott said one day, laughing as if it were a joke. Laura's smile faded, but she told herself he didn't mean it. She convinced herself it was a misunderstanding, but it wasn't. Scott's remarks about her skin grew sharper, more cutting. He would joke about her in front of his friends, making light of her brown complexion as if it were something to be ashamed of. Laura would laugh nervously, but inside her heart was cracking. The man she had married, the one who had promised to love her unconditionally, was now making her feel like her very existence was a flaw. Laura tried harder to please him. She cooked his favorite meals, wore the dresses he liked, and tried to look as perfect as possible when he came home. But Scott's attention drifted elsewhere. He started coming home late, his excuses growing thinner by the day. Laura saw the way he looked at other women with pale skin and blonde hair, the complete opposite of her. He barely touched her anymore. When she reached for his hand at night, he would pull away. When she leaned in for a kiss, he would give her a peck on the forehead instead of the passionate embrace she craved. The bedroom became cold, and Laura's heart followed. Still, she held on. She told herself that marriage was about weathering storms, about working through difficult times. She believed that if she loved him enough, if she gave him more of herself, he would eventually see her value. She blamed herself when things went wrong, thinking maybe if she were more beautiful, more perfect, Scott would love her again. But Scott's cruelty escalated. He started ignoring her at social events, leaving her to stand alone while he charmed other women. When Laura confronted him, he laughed in her face. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Don't be so sensitive." Laura's heart broke a little more each time. Nights became lonely, the bed feeling colder with each passing day. Laura would sit on the edge of their bed, her long braids falling over her shoulders, tears streaming down her face as Scott slept peacefully beside her, completely indifferent to her pain. Her beautiful brown eyes, once filled with warmth, now held the weight of quiet sadness. Yet, she refused to give up. Laura's strength was her greatest weapon, but even strength has its limits. The turning point came one evening when Laura walked into a party with Scott and caught him shamelessly flirting with another woman. The woman laughed, touching Scott's arm while he whispered into her ear. Laura's heart sank. Scott didn't even bother hiding it anymore. That night, as they drove home in silence, Laura realized that her love alone would never be enough to fix a man who had no interest in loving her back. That night, as Laura lay awake in the dark, she made a decision that would change her life forever. The man who had promised her forever had instead given her years of quiet misery. Laura knew that it was time to choose herself, to stop begging for love from a man who didn't see her worth. Her heart might have been broken, but her spirit wasn't. And deep down, Laura knew that there was more waiting for her beyond the pain, a future where love wasn't a fight, but a gift freely given. She just didn't know that her real love story was about to begin. After the wedding, the magic that Laura Mitchell had once felt with Scott began to unravel thread by thread, like a delicate fabric slowly coming apart at the seams. At first, it was subtle, almost unnoticeable. The way Scott's eyes would darken with disinterest when Laura spoke, or the way his hands would slide away from hers when she reached for him. But as the weeks turned into months, the cruelty that had once been hidden behind polite smiles and charming words began to emerge in sharp, cutting fragments that left Laura's heart bleeding. It started with the teasing, soft jabs disguised as jokes that cut deeper than any blade. "You know, you'd be so much prettier if your skin weren't so dark," Scott said one evening as they sat at the dinner table. Laura's hand froze over her plate, her chest tightening as the words settled in. She forced a smile, thinking maybe he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But then it happened again. And again. "I don't know why you bother wearing makeup. It's not like it's going to lighten you up," he sneered as she applied lipstick in the mirror before a dinner party. Laura's hands trembled, but she swallowed the hurt and told herself that Scott was just stressed, that he didn't really mean it. After all, he had married her, hadn't he? But love shouldn't feel like this, like constantly walking on broken glass, afraid to take a single step for fear of bleeding. Scott's insults sharpened over time. He no longer bothered to hide them behind smiles or playful tones. When they were out with his friends, he would laugh at her expense. "Yeah, Laura's always so quiet, probably because she knows no one really wants to hear what she has to say," he would say, his friends laughing along while Laura sat there, cheeks burning with humiliation. She would try to catch his eye to silently beg him to stop, but Scott would just smirk, a cruel glint in his blue eyes. Laura would excuse herself, hiding in the bathroom with tears stinging her eyes, wondering how the man who had once whispered love into her ear beneath the stars could now treat her like this. But the pain didn't stop there. Scott's neglect stretched into every part of their marriage. He would come home late, sometimes not at all, with weak excuses about work. Laura would wait up for him, sitting on the edge of their bed with the bedside lamp still on, but Scott wouldn't even acknowledge her when he finally stumbled through the door. Sometimes he smelled like alcohol and perfume, a scent that didn't belong to her. "Are you seeing someone else?" Laura asked one night, her voice shaking. Scott's eyes narrowed. "Don't be pathetic," he snapped, brushing past her as if her question was beneath him. Laura's heart twisted painfully, but she still told herself that maybe if she loved him harder, if she made herself more beautiful, more interesting, more everything, maybe then he would see her. She started cooking his favorite meals, dressing in the outfits he used to love, styling her hair differently. She wore perfume that she knew he liked, learned how to make cocktails he preferred, and tried to engage him in conversations about his day. But Scott would barely look up from his phone or his laptop. He would grunt in response or say, "Not now, Laura. I'm busy." Laura's heart grew heavier each day, but still she stayed. She told herself that marriage wasn't easy, that everyone went through rough patches. But how long was a rough patch supposed to last? Weeks turned into months, and the distance between them widened into a chasm so vast that Laura could no longer see the man she had married on the other side. And then Scott's cruelty deepened. He began flirting openly with other women, in front of her. Laura would watch as he leaned too close to a beautiful blonde at a party, his hand resting on the small of her back. The woman would laugh at something he said, and Scott would smile in a way that he hadn't smiled at Laura in months. One night, Laura gathered the courage to confront him. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked, her voice trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. Scott's gaze was cold, devoid of any softness. "Doing what?" he said flatly. "You're imagining things." "No, I'm not," Laura whispered. "You don't love me anymore." Scott's lips curled into a smirk. "Maybe you were never worth loving in the first place." Laura's breath hitched, the air leaving her lungs as if someone had punched her. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but Scott simply shrugged and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the darkness of their bedroom. After that, Laura stopped trying so hard. Her hope had withered beneath Scott's relentless indifference. When she sat across from him at dinner, he barely even looked at her. When they lay in bed, he would roll away from her, his back turned like a physical barrier between them. The nights became unbearable. Laura would lie awake for hours, listening to the sound of Scott's steady breathing as her heart ached for a single touch, a single sign that he still cared. But Scott had built walls between them so high that Laura could no longer see over them. One night, Laura came home early from work and found Scott sitting in the living room, laughing on the phone with someone. "Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow," he said, his tone light and flirtatious. When he ended the call, Laura asked, "Who was that?" Scott rolled his eyes. "God, Laura, you're so insecure." Laura's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Why are you doing this to me?" Scott's gaze sharpened. "Because you're suffocating me. Maybe if you weren't so needy." Laura's heart shattered right then and there. She had given Scott everything, her love, her trust, her body, her soul, and he had treated her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. That night, Laura sat on the floor of their bathroom, hugging her knees to her chest as tears streamed down her cheeks. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who looked hollow, her once radiant eyes now dulled by sadness. Her long braids framed her face, but even they seemed to lack the vibrance they once held. Laura knew then that love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to hurt. Love wasn't supposed to break you down until you no longer recognized yourself. And yet, that's exactly what Scott had done to her. She had held on for so long, believing that she could fix him, that her love could heal whatever darkness lived inside him. But love couldn't grow where it wasn't nurtured. Laura's heart was breaking, but this time it was breaking open. And deep down, beneath the pain and humiliation, Laura felt the first stirring of strength. A quiet whisper that told her that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop fighting for someone who had never fought for her in return. Scott had taken her love for granted, but he would never have the chance to break her again. Laura's heart sank deeper into the abyss of despair as Scott's betrayal began unfolding before her eyes, piece by devastating piece. What had once been hidden beneath the surface of subtle indifference and coldness now emerged in harsh, undeniable clarity. It started with lingering glances, Scott's blue eyes trailing after women who weren't her, his gaze filled with an interest and hunger that Laura had never seen directed toward herself. She would catch him looking at other women when they were at dinners, his gaze lingering a little too long on the curve of a stranger's waist, or the way a woman's laughter lit up the room. At first, Laura tried to dismiss it as harmless, a fleeting male instinct. But deep down, her heart knew better. The confirmation came one night at a company party. Laura had spent hours getting ready, wearing the emerald green dress that Scott had once said made her eyes shine. She had carefully braided her hair into a long, elegant cascade down her back and even applied a touch of red lipstick to make herself feel confident. As they arrived at the party, Laura's heart lifted when Scott's hand rested briefly on the small of her back, a rare moment of warmth that she hadn't felt in months. But the warmth turned to ice when Scott's hand slipped away the moment they entered the crowded room. He spotted a tall, blonde woman standing by the bar, her dress clinging to her body in a way that left nothing to the imagination. Scott's eyes darkened with interest as his lips curled into a familiar, predatory smirk. Laura's stomach twisted painfully as Scott walked straight toward the woman, leaving her standing alone near the doorway. She watched, frozen, as Scott leaned close to the woman, whispering something in her ear that made the blonde giggle and place a hand on his chest. Laura's breath hitched as heat rushed to her cheeks, not from desire, but from pure humiliation. People were watching. She could feel their gazes burning into her, their judgment slicing through her like daggers. She heard murmurs, whispers of pity and amusement as Scott's hand slid down the blonde woman's arm in a gesture far too intimate for a married man. Laura's hands curled into fists at her sides as she forced herself to look away, but the damage was already done. The image was burned into her mind. Later that night, when they got home, Laura confronted him. "Why would you humiliate me like that?" she asked, her voice trembling with quiet desperation. Scott barely spared her a glance as he loosened his tie and sat on the edge of the bed. "You're overreacting," he said coldly. "It was just a conversation." "You touched her," Laura said, her chest tightening. Scott's eyes sharpened as he let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, please, you're acting like I slept with her." Laura's throat tightened. "Do you want to?" Scott's gaze darkened. "Maybe I wouldn't have to look elsewhere if you weren't so boring." The words struck her like a physical blow. Laura stumbled back, her heart racing as tears burned behind her eyes. "I've given you everything," she whispered. "My love, my loyalty. I've stood by you even when you treated me like I didn't exist." Scott's gaze was cold. "Maybe that's the problem." Laura's chest ached as she watched him rise from the bed and walk toward the bathroom, leaving her standing there with her arms wrapped tightly around her body, trying to hold herself together. After that night, Scott's betrayals became more frequent and more blatant. He would come home late, sometimes not at all. Laura would sit by the window, waiting for him long past midnight, her heart sinking with every passing hour. Sometimes he would stumble in, reeking of alcohol and perfume that wasn't hers. "Where were you?" Laura would ask, her voice small and fragile. "Out," Scott would reply, his tone sharp and dismissive. He never offered her an explanation, as if she didn't deserve one. The worst part was that he no longer even bothered to hide it. When they went to social events, he would openly flirt with other women, his hand resting casually on a woman's waist as Laura stood just feet away, pretending not to see. Her friends would shoot her pitying looks, and Laura hated how exposed and vulnerable she felt. One evening, Laura caught him in the act, not just flirting, but kissing another woman. It happened at a charity gala, a high-profile event where cameras flashed and people mingled with champagne glasses in hand. Laura had stepped away to freshen up in the restroom, and when she returned, she saw him, pressed against a dark-haired woman near the back of the hall, his lips on hers. Laura's breath stopped. Her heart twisted painfully in her chest as tears welled in her eyes. She turned and left the gala, walking down the street in her heels with tears streaming down her cheeks. Scott came home hours later, finding Laura sitting on the edge of their bed with her arms wrapped around her knees. "I saw you," she said quietly, her voice raw. Scott sighed. "Laura, don't lie to me." Scott's gaze hardened. "So what if I kissed her?" Laura's head snapped up. "How can you say that to me?" Scott's expression was blank. "It's not like you've ever been enough." Laura's heart shattered at that moment. The last fragile thread holding her together finally snapped. She stood up, tears running down her cheeks. "I loved you," she whispered. "I gave you everything." Scott's gaze remained cold. "Maybe that was your mistake." Laura's legs buckled beneath her, but she caught herself before she could fall. Something inside her shifted in that moment, a quiet realization that she could no longer survive like this. Scott had broken her piece by piece until there was barely anything left of the woman she used to be. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop holding on to a love that had never truly existed. That night, Laura lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling as Scott slept peacefully beside her. Her heart felt heavy, but beneath the pain there was also a spark of clarity. Laura finally knew the truth. Scott would never love her the way she deserved to be loved, and now, for the first time in years, Laura began to wonder if she had the strength to walk away, to stop begging for the scraps of love from a man who had never valued her heart in the first place. And deep down, she realized that maybe the heartbreak wasn't her failure. Maybe it was Scott's. Maybe the real mistake was ever believing that he was capable of love. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to find the strength to let go. Laura sat alone in the dim light of their bedroom, the cool night air brushing against her skin as the weight of her reality pressed down on her chest like a stone. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over the thin silver band on her finger, the wedding ring that once symbolized hope, love, and a future she had dreamed of. Now it was nothing more than a chain around her soul, a reminder of the years she had wasted trying to make Scott love her. Tears welled in her brown eyes as she thought about the countless nights she had spent waiting for him, waiting for a kiss that never came, a tender touch that never followed, a word of love that was never spoken. How many nights had she sat by the window, watching the headlights of passing cars, hoping one of them would bring Scott home at a reasonable hour. Sober, faithful, and maybe, just maybe, looking at her with something resembling love. But it never happened. It was always the same. He would come home late, his tie undone, the scent of perfume clinging to his skin, perfume that was not hers. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. He'd make excuses. "It's business," he'd say, or worse, "Don't wait up for me." And when she would ask him where he had been, he would roll his eyes, scoff, and tell her she was being paranoid. But Laura wasn't stupid. She saw the text messages on his phone, the lipstick stains on his collar, the subtle but undeniable scent of another woman's perfume when he leaned too close. She endured it all, not because she was weak, but because she had hoped. She had hoped that maybe, one day, he would realize how much she loved him. That one day he would stop looking at other women and start looking at her the way he used to, with that rare flicker of interest that had once made her feel beautiful. But hope had turned into a slow death, draining her heart with each passing day until there was nothing left but the hollow ache of disappointment. Laura had tried everything to be the perfect wife. She had cooked his favorite meals, worn the dresses he liked, styled her long braids the way he once said made her look beautiful. She had smiled through the pain, ignored the gossip, and convinced herself that maybe this was just a phase, that Scott would change. But he never did. And then there was that night, the night that changed everything. Laura had arrived early to one of Scott's company parties, determined to support him despite her growing emptiness. She had worn a sleek red dress, the one she knew complemented her smooth brown skin and made her feel like a goddess. Her hair was braided into an elegant crown, and her makeup was flawless. She had hoped Scott would see her, really see her, and maybe, just for one night, he would hold her hand and be proud that she was his wife. But when she walked into the hall, her heart stopped. Scott wasn't alone. He was at the bar, his hand resting on the hip of a tall brunette with piercing green eyes. The woman leaned into him, her lips close to his ear, and Scott was smiling. Laura's chest constricted as she watched the woman's hand slip up Scott's chest, her fingers curling into his tie. Scott didn't pull away. He leaned closer. And then it happened. Scott's hand slipped down the woman's back, his mouth grazing her ear as he whispered something that made her laugh. Laura felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest as tears filled her eyes. People were watching. She could hear the whispers, pitying, amused, and then someone chuckled, "Poor Laura." Laura's eyes burned as Scott glanced toward her, and instead of guilt or shame, there was nothing in his gaze but cold indifference, as if she was invisible, as if she didn't matter. Laura turned and left the party without saying a word. She walked through the rain, her heels clicking against the pavement, her heart splintering with each step. When she got home, Scott was already there, sitting casually on the couch with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You left early," he said lazily. Laura stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself as tears streamed down her face. "I saw you," she whispered. Scott's gaze darkened slightly, but there was no apology in his eyes. "And?" Laura's throat tightened. "You're my husband." Scott's mouth curled into a cold smirk. "That's just a piece of paper." Her heart broke in that moment. Truly broke. Laura had spent years trying to hold on to something that had died long ago. Maybe it had never even existed in the first place. She realized then that she had been fighting for a love that wasn't real, a love Scott was incapable of giving her. And suddenly the truth was crystal clear. Scott was never going to change. He was never going to love her the way she needed to be loved, and Laura was done begging for crumbs of affection from a man who had already given his heart to someone else. That night, she sat at the edge of their bed with the divorce papers in her lap. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. Tears blurred her vision as she signed her name at the bottom of the page, the final goodbye to a marriage that had only ever been a prison. When Scott came home and saw the papers on the table, He laughed bitterly. "You think you're going to find someone better than me?" he sneered. Laura's gaze hardened as she stood tall, strength and resolve filling her chest for the first time in years. "I don't need to find someone better, Scott," she said quietly. "I just need to find myself again." Scott's smile faded. "You'll regret this," he said coldly. Laura shook her head. "I regret staying this long." And with that, Laura walked out the door, out of the cold, loveless house that had never truly been a home. She left behind the man who had broken her heart, the lies, the betrayal, and the emptiness. She left behind the version of herself that had settled for less than she deserved. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, the weight that had been pressing down on her chest for years began to lift. She wasn't sure what her future held, but for the first time in a long time, Laura knew one thing for certain. She was done begging for love. She was done shrinking herself to fit into Scott's cold, unforgiving world. Laura was free, and that freedom was more valuable than any promise of love Scott had ever made. Laura took a deep breath as she stood in front of the towering glass building, its sleek surface reflecting the early morning sun. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she straightened her shoulders, adjusted the soft lavender blouse that complemented her brown skin, and lifted her chin. This was her fresh start. After the divorce, after the heartache, after years of being made to feel unworthy, Laura had decided it was time to reclaim her life, to build something new for herself, away from Scott's shadow, away from the pain of his rejection. Her long, braided hair cascaded over her shoulder as she pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the modern lobby of Charles Enterprises. The pristine marble floors gleamed beneath her heels, and the sound of her steps echoed faintly in the vast space. The receptionist, a polished woman in a sleek black suit, gave her a professional smile. "Miss Mitchell, right?" Laura nodded, her hands tightening around the small leather clutch she held. "Yes." "Mr. Charles will see you now." Laura's breath hitched slightly as she followed the receptionist toward the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected her tall, graceful figure, the smoothness of her brown skin, the quiet elegance in her dark brown eyes. And despite her nervousness, she reminded herself why she was here. This was about survival. She needed this job. She needed to rebuild her life, her independence, and most importantly, her sense of self-worth. When the elevator doors slid open, Laura was led down a long hallway with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. The sun streamed in, casting golden light over the plush charcoal carpet. The receptionist stopped at a heavy mahogany door and pushed it open. "Miss Mitchell, Mr. Charles will see you now." Laura stepped inside, and the moment her eyes met Max Charles, the air seemed to shift. He stood near the large window, his tall figure bathed in soft sunlight. He was devastatingly handsome, dark hair tousled just enough to make him look effortlessly powerful, sharp blue-gray eyes that were both piercing and calculating, and a strong jawline that softened slightly when his gaze landed on her. He was dressed in a tailored black suit that hugged his broad shoulders and long frame perfectly, the crisp white shirt underneath open at the collar, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin. For a moment, Laura forgot how to breathe. Max Charles stared at her, his eyes darkening as he took her in. Her smooth brown skin, her long braids framing her delicate face, the quiet strength in her eyes. He didn't smile, but something flickered in his gaze. Curiosity, intrigue, maybe even desire. Laura's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice low and smooth, "please have a seat." Laura walked toward the sleek black chair across from his desk, conscious of how his eyes followed her every step. She sat, crossing her legs neatly, and forced herself to meet his gaze despite the way it unsettled her. You're applying for the executive assistant position, Max said, his gaze never leaving her face. Yes, Laura replied, her voice steady. I believe I have the qualifications and experience necessary for the role. Max leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes studying her like he was trying to see beneath the surface. Your resume is impressive, he said, but that's not what interests me. Laura's brow furrowed slightly. What do you mean? Your presence, Max said simply. The way you carry yourself, poised, elegant, but guarded. You've been hurt. Laura stiffened. My personal life isn't relevant to this interview. A small smile curved the corner of Max's mouth. Perhaps not. But it's relevant to me. Laura's pulse quickened. I'm not here to discuss my past. I'm here because I need this job. And you have it, Max said without hesitation. Laura's mouth parted slightly. Excuse me? You're hired, Max said, standing and walking toward the window. His broad shoulders tensed beneath his jacket as he slid his hands into his pockets. Report here on Monday at 8 a.m. Laura stood slowly, disbelief washing over her. But you barely asked me any questions. Max turned, his eyes dark and serious. I don't need to. I've already decided. Laura's heart pounded painfully in her chest. Why? Max's gaze softened slightly as he stepped closer to her. Because you intrigue me, Miss Mitchell. Laura swallowed hard as Max's gaze darkened with something intense, something dangerously close to desire. I don't mix business with personal matters, she said quietly, even as her pulse quickened beneath the weight of his stare. Max's smile was faint, but his eyes burned with intensity. That's a shame. Laura's breath hitched as Max closed the space between them, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. I think you and I are going to get along very well. Laura's stomach flipped, but she quickly composed herself. Thank you, Mr. Charles. I'll see you Monday. She turned and walked toward the door, but before she could leave, Max's voice stopped her. Laura. She glanced over her shoulder. Yes? Don't be late. Laura's lips parted slightly, but she quickly nodded and slipped out of the office. As the door clicked shut behind her, her heart thundered in her chest. What had just happened? Max Charles was unlike anyone she had ever met, commanding, confident, and unsettlingly perceptive. He had seen right through her guarded exterior and sensed her vulnerability. But there was something else beneath his intense gaze, something that made her skin heat and her heart race. Laura knew one thing for sure. Working for Max Charles was going to be more complicated than she had anticipated. But as she stepped out into the crisp morning air, a strange sensation bloomed in her chest. A flicker of excitement, of possibility. For the first time in years, she felt seen. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a job. Max Charles wasn't just interested in her resume. He was interested in her, and that terrified her as much as it thrilled her. Max Charles couldn't ignore the effect Laura Mitchell had on him from the moment he first saw her. Every time she walked into his office, dressed in her elegant yet understated style, with her long braids flowing down her back and those mesmerizing brown eyes framed by thick lashes, Max felt his pulse quicken in a way that was foreign to him. He had been with countless beautiful women before, models and socialites who threw themselves at him for his status and wealth. But Laura was different, strikingly different. There was something about the quiet strength in her gaze, the way she carried herself with grace, even when her eyes were shadowed with unspoken pain, that made Max desperate to unravel the mystery surrounding her. He noticed the way her lips pressed into a thin line when she thought no one was looking, the sadness that flickered across her face when someone mentioned anything remotely romantic. And yet, despite her guarded demeanor, there was an undeniable warmth beneath the surface, a kindness in her smile when she spoke to the office staff, a quiet resilience in the way she handled pressure. Max found himself drawn to her more and more each day. At first, he kept it professional, asking her to bring reports to his office or accompany him to business meetings. But he found himself lingering longer than necessary after those meetings, just to steal a moment alone with her. He would watch the delicate curve of her neck when she leaned over his desk to hand him files, and the soft scent of jasmine and vanilla that lingered in the air after she left would haunt him for hours. He wasn't used to feeling like this, out of control, vulnerable, but Laura made him feel both alive and restless at the same time. One evening, after a long meeting, Max invited Laura to have a drink with him at the rooftop bar of the building. Laura hesitated, her guarded expression instantly surfacing. "I don't think that's appropriate," she said, her voice soft yet firm. Max leaned closer, his intense blue-gray eyes locking onto hers. "It's just a drink," he said with a small smile. "Consider it a work debrief." Laura sighed, her instincts telling her to refuse, but something about the warmth in Max's gaze made her falter. Reluctantly, she agreed. They sat under the open sky, the city lights glittering below them. Max watched the way Laura wrapped her fingers around the stem of her glass, her long, delicate fingers trembling slightly. "Laura," he said, his voice low and intimate, "you don't talk about yourself much." Laura's eyes darkened and her smile faded. "There's not much to say." "I don't believe that," Max replied softly. "Someone hurt you." Laura's breath hitched and she looked away toward the skyline. "It's in the past." Max leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. "What if I said I want to know?" Laura's hands tightened around her glass. "Why?" "Because I see you," Max said simply. "And I want to understand you." Laura's heart thudded painfully in her chest. No one had ever said that to her before. Scott had never cared to know her feelings, never cared to understand her beyond the surface. And now Max Charles, this wealthy, powerful CEO who could have any woman in the world, was sitting across from her, looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. A part of her wanted to shut him out, to build back the walls she had carefully constructed after Scott's cruelty, but another part of her, the part that was desperate to feel loved, to feel seen, longed to let him in. "I was married," she said quietly, her eyes still focused on the city below. Max's expression hardened slightly, but he stayed silent, letting her speak at her own pace. "To a man named Scott. He never loved me. He hated my skin, my body, the way I looked. He insulted me, cheated on me, made me feel worthless." Her voice broke slightly, but she forced herself to keep going. "I tried to make it work, for years, but eventually, I had to let go." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Max's hand was suddenly there, brushing it away with the pad of his thumb. "He was a fool," Max said, his voice rough with restrained anger. "To have you and treat you like that." Laura's eyes widened slightly at the fierceness in his gaze. "It doesn't matter now," she whispered. "It does matter," Max said, his hand still cupping her cheek. "Because you deserve more than that. You deserve to be cherished, to be loved the way you should have been from the beginning." Laura's throat tightened. "Max." He leaned closer, his eyes darkening with emotion. "If you let me, I'll show you how it feels to be loved." Laura's breath caught painfully in her chest, and Max's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I'm not asking for an answer now," Max said softly. "Just let me in. Let me prove to you that love doesn't have to hurt." Laura swallowed hard, her heart racing beneath the weight of his gaze. She had told herself she would never trust again, that love was nothing but pain and betrayal. But Max was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, like her brown skin, her long braids, her quiet strength were all things to be worshipped, not hidden. For the first time in years, she felt wanted. Laura hesitated for a moment, then slowly leaned into Max's touch, her eyes fluttering shut. Max's breath hitched, but he didn't push her. He just let his hand linger against her skin, a quiet promise in his touch. Laura's heart pounded as she slowly opened her eyes and whispered, "I'm scared." Max's gaze softened. "I'll wait," he said, "for as long as it takes." And in that moment, Laura knew that Max Charles was different. He wasn't Scott. He wasn't trying to break her. He was trying to heal her. And maybe, just maybe, Laura was ready to let him try. It was late in the evening when Laura finally allowed herself to open the guarded door she had built around her heart. The office was quiet. The only sound, the soft hum of the city lights beneath the glass windows of Max Charles's penthouse office. Laura had stayed behind to finish up some reports, but Max had insisted on keeping her company. He sat across from her at the sleek marble conference table, his sharp, tailored suit slightly loosened at the collar, his intense blue-gray eyes watching her every move. Laura's long braids were tied back loosely, a few strands falling over her shoulder as she typed. Max's gaze softened as he watched her, but there was something more. Something haunted in the way her brows furrowed and her shoulders tensed whenever he got too close. He had noticed it for weeks. How Laura would flinch at the smallest touch. How she avoided eye contact whenever anything remotely personal came up. Max wasn't the kind of man to push. He understood boundaries better than anyone. But with Laura, it was different. He wanted to know her. He needed to know her. He had fallen for her quiet strength, for the grace she carried even when he could see her heart was weighed down by something heavy. "Laura," Max's voice was low, cutting through the quiet of the room. She glanced up from her laptop, her brown eyes guarded. "You've been working hard. Come sit with me for a while." Laura hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, but the warmth in Max's tone made her stand without thinking. She crossed the room and sat beside him on the black leather couch. Max turned slightly, his gaze steady and patient. "You're always so strong," he murmured, "but sometimes strength means knowing when to share the weight." Laura's lips parted slightly, her eyes glistening as she tried to hold back the storm brewing behind them. Max took her hand gently, his thumb tracing soft circles over her knuckles. "Let me in, Laura." Her heart thudded painfully, and for a moment she considered pulling away. But Max's touch was so steady, so grounding. Her throat tightened as the words finally broke free. "I was married," she whispered. Max's jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He just nodded, his hand never leaving hers. "His name was Scott," Laura continued, her voice breaking. "We met when I was young. I thought he loved me. I thought I could make him love me." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Max reached up, brushing it away with the back of his knuckles. "He never did." Her voice was hollow, edged with the weight of years of pain. "Scott hated me," she said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "He hated my skin, my hair, the way I looked. He made me feel ugly, like I wasn't enough." Max's expression darkened, his gaze hardening at the raw vulnerability in her words. Laura swallowed hard. "He would tease me about my skin, call me names, laugh at me in front of his friends. And when I tried to make things better, when I tried to be the perfect wife, he would push me away. He humiliated me, flirted with other women right in front of me. He'd touch them, smile at them. And when I would confront him, he'd tell me it was my fault, that I was too boring, too brown." A sob escaped her throat, and Max's hand tightened around hers. "I hated myself for loving him. I hated myself for trying so hard when all he ever gave me was rejection." Max's jaw flexed with controlled rage, but he didn't interrupt. He leaned closer, his hand slipping to the small of her back as Laura's breathing hitched. "I stayed with him for years," Laura said bitterly. "I told myself that love was about sacrifice, that if I just loved him enough, he would finally see me. But he never did. Her eyes lifted to Max's, glistening with tears. I gave up everything for him. I gave him my heart, my body, my soul, and he threw it away like it was nothing. Max's hand slid to her cheek, his thumb brushing away another tear. His expression was fierce, protective. It wasn't nothing, he said quietly. You gave him something sacred. He was the fool for not treasuring it. Laura's breath hitched. I don't know how to trust anymore. I don't know if I can. Max's eyes softened, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. You don't have to know, he whispered. All you have to do is let me try. Laura's lips parted, but no sound came out. Max's hand slid into her hair, his fingers threading through the long braids. Let me show you what it feels like to be loved, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. If you give me the chance, Laura, I'll give you a life full of love. Her chest ached with the weight of his words. Could she believe him? Could she risk her heart again after everything Scott had done to her? But when Max's hand slid down to cradle her jaw, and his eyes burned with nothing but devotion and tenderness, Laura felt something inside her shift, something fragile and broken starting to heal. I'm scared, she admitted. Max's lips brushed her forehead. I know, he whispered, but I'm not Scott, and I'm not going anywhere. Laura's breathing hitched as Max's lips hovered inches from hers. You don't have to decide tonight, Max said, his voice low and reassuring. But know this, I'm not giving up on you. Ever. Laura's eyes fluttered shut as Max's lips pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. Her heart was still raw, still aching from years of neglect and rejection, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Max's arms were strong, steady as he pulled her against his chest, holding her like she was something precious. Laura let out a shaky breath, her face resting against his shoulder. Max's hand slid up her back, his touch warm and protective. We'll take this slow, Max whispered into her hair. I'll wait for as long as you need. Laura's eyes squeezed shut as another tear slipped down her cheek. Slowly, her arms wrapped around Max's waist, and his heartbeat thrummed steady beneath her palm. For the first time since Scott, Laura felt safe. For the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, love didn't have to hurt. Max knew from the beginning that Laura was different, not just because of her beauty, but because of the quiet strength beneath her guarded exterior. After Laura opened up to him about her past, something in Max shifted. He no longer felt like he was just drawn to her beauty. He wanted to protect her heart, heal the scars left behind by a man who never deserved her in the first place. Max wasn't the kind of man who chased women. He didn't need to. As one of the wealthiest CEOs in the city, women often threw themselves at him. But he had never been interested in shallow connections. But with Laura, it was different. He saw her pain, her vulnerability, and yet she carried herself with such quiet grace that it made his chest tighten every time she smiled, even if it was faint. Max knew he had to be careful with her. He couldn't rush her or overwhelm her. Laura had been wounded too deeply. So he took his time, starting with the small things. Every morning he would make sure coffee was waiting for her on her desk, exactly how she liked it, with oat milk and a touch of honey. When she stayed late working, Max would find an excuse to drop by her office, bringing her favorite pastry from the cafe down the street. At first, Laura hesitated to accept his kindness. Her instinct was to keep her guard up, but Max's patience began to wear down the walls she had built. One evening, after a long day at work, Max appeared at her office door with a small smile and a bouquet of pale pink roses. "Dinner?" he asked casually. Laura's brow lifted. "Dinner?" Max's smile widened. "Unless you have other plans." Laura hesitated, her heart fluttering painfully in her chest. Every date she had gone on with Scott had ended in humiliation or rejection. But Max wasn't Scott. He wasn't mocking her. His gaze was warm, steady. After a moment, she nodded. Okay. Max took her to an intimate Italian restaurant, the kind with low lighting and soft music. He pulled out her chair, brushed his hand over hers as he handed her the menu. Throughout dinner, he asked her questions about her life, her childhood, her favorite books, her dreams. And he listened. He didn't interrupt or make her feel small. He leaned in, watching her with fascination as she spoke. Laura found herself smiling more than she had in years. Max was charming, but not in a forced way. His laugh was deep and genuine, and the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the room, made her heart flutter dangerously. After dinner, Max suggested a walk along the river. The night was cool, the moonlight glinting off the water. Laura wrapped her arms around herself, but Max shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders without hesitation. Laura's breath caught as his hand brushed her collarbone. Cold, Max murmured. Laura shook her head, but her cheeks flushed. Max's hand slid to the small of her back as they walked. I had a good time tonight, he said softly. Laura glanced at him. Me too. His smile was faint but genuine. Can I see you again tomorrow? Laura's heart skipped. Don't you have work? Max's smile deepened. I always have work, but I'd rather spend my time with you. Laura's cheeks burned, but the warmth of his jacket and the intensity in his gaze made her stomach flip. The next day, Max sent flowers to her office, white lilies this time with a handwritten note. Dinner tonight? Laura's lips twitched. That night, he took her to a rooftop overlooking the city. They sat beneath the stars, sipping wine and sharing quiet stories. Max's arm rested along the back of her chair, his fingers brushing her shoulder. Slowly, Laura began to let her guard down. Max never pushed. He was patient, always giving her space to decide. But he made his feelings clear in every gesture, the way he held open doors, the way he leaned down to whisper into her ear when they were at events, the way his hand would linger on her lower back when he guided her through a crowd. One Saturday, Max took her on a long drive to a secluded beach house he owned. The view was breathtaking, the sun casting gold over the ocean. Laura stood barefoot in the sand, her long braids catching in the breeze. Max came up behind her, his hands sliding gently over her waist. Beautiful, isn't it? Laura smiled faintly. Yes. Max's lips brushed her temple. Not as beautiful as you. Laura's heart fluttered painfully. She turned, looking up at him. Max's gaze softened as he brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You're making it very hard for me to stay patient, Laura. Her breath caught. Patient? Max's smile was small but tender. I want you, Laura, but I'll wait as long as it takes. I just need you to know I'm falling for you. Laura's chest tightened painfully. Her instinct was to pull away, to protect herself. But Max's gaze was so steady, so honest, that she found herself leaning into him instead. Max's hand slid to her cheek. It's okay to be scared, he whispered. I'm scared too. Laura's heart thudded painfully. Why would you be scared? Max's jaw flexed. Because I've never cared about someone like this before. Laura's breath caught. Max's thumb brushed her lower lip. Just tell me you'll give me a chance. Laura hesitated, but only for a second. Then, slowly, she nodded. Max's smile was faint, but relieved. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. That night, they sat on the deck of the beach house, wrapped in a blanket as the waves crashed beneath them. Max's arm was around her, and Laura's head rested on his chest. Slowly, her heart began to settle. She wasn't whole yet. There were still scars left behind by Scott's betrayal, but Max made her feel safe, wanted, cherished. Slowly but surely, Laura felt herself starting to heal. And the more time she spent with Max, the more he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The more Laura realized that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to fall in love again. It was a cool evening, the kind where the air carried a crispness that hinted at the change of seasons, but the sky remained clear, decorated with a blanket of shimmering stars. Laura had no idea what Max had planned when he invited her for dinner that night, casually mentioning that it would be somewhere special. She had grown used to Max's thoughtfulness over the past months, the romantic dinners, the late-night drives where they would talk for hours, the quiet mornings when he would leave coffee and a note on her nightstand before heading off to work. But tonight felt different. Laura noticed the way Max had been watching her all day, his gaze lingering on her face with a softness that made her chest tighten. He had picked her up at her apartment, dressed impeccably in a tailored black suit, his dark hair styled perfectly. When she opened the door, Max's eyes had swept over her in silent admiration. The way her elegant emerald green dress hugged her slender figure, the way her long braids cascaded down her back, the delicate gold necklace that rested just above her collarbone. "You look breathtaking," Max had whispered, his hand brushing along her waist as he leaned down to kiss her cheek. Laura smiled shyly, feeling the warmth of his touch long after his lips left her skin. She sat quietly in the car as Max drove through the city, her heart fluttering with quiet anticipation. When they arrived at the building, Max took her hand and led her to a private elevator. "Where are we going?" Laura asked, her voice light but curious. Max smiled down at her. "You'll see." The elevator doors opened to a rooftop terrace, and Laura's breath caught in her throat. The scene before her was nothing short of magical. Candles flickered in soft golden light, scattered across the terrace in an intricate pattern. A table was set beneath a canopy of string lights, surrounded by lush white roses and delicate glass lanterns. Beyond the terrace, the city skyline stretched out endlessly, the lights twinkling like stars. Laura's hand tightened around Max's as he led her toward the table. "Max," her voice was barely a whisper. "Did you do all this?" Max smiled, his eyes warm. "You like it?" Laura turned to him, her lips trembling slightly. "It's beautiful." Max pulled out her chair, brushing a kiss over her knuckles before helping her sit down. A waiter appeared quietly, pouring champagne into 2 crystal glasses. Laura watched Max as he lifted his glass, his gaze steady on hers. "To you," Max said softly, "for being the most incredible woman I've ever known." Laura's heart hammered painfully in her chest as they clinked glasses. Dinner was exquisite. Max had arranged for her favorite dishes, from delicate risotto to seared scallops, each course arriving with quiet precision. But Laura could barely focus on the food, not with the way Max was looking at her, his gaze tender and intense, as though he was memorizing every detail of her face. After dessert, Max stood and extended his hand. "Come with me," he said softly. Laura hesitated for a moment before sliding her hand into his. Max led her to the edge of the terrace where the city lights shimmered beneath them. Laura's breath caught as Max turned to face her, his hands gently settling on her waist. "Laura," Max whispered, his voice low and steady, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you." Laura's pulse quickened. Max's hands slid down her arms, his thumbs brushing the inside of her wrists. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were different," Max murmured. "I knew you had been hurt. I saw it in your eyes. But you didn't let it make you hard or cold. You stayed kind. You stayed brave. And you let me in." Laura's lips parted, her heart thudding painfully against her ribs. "Max." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Laura's breath caught as Max sank to one knee, the city lights flickering behind him like 1,000 stars. He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that caught the candlelight, sparkling brilliantly. But it wasn't the ring that made Laura's chest tighten. It was the look in Max's eyes. Pure devotion, pure love. "Laura Mitchell," Max said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his gaze. "You have given me more than I ever thought I deserved. You made me believe in love again. You showed me what it means to care about someone completely, without holding back. I love you, Laura, more than I've ever loved anything in my life." Tears blurred Laura's vision. Max's eyes softened. "Marry me, Laura. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you the way you deserve." Laura's breath hitched. Her heart felt like it was going to shatter, not from pain, but from the overwhelming flood of love and gratitude surging through her veins. Tears slipped down her cheeks as Max's gaze stayed steady on hers, patient and hopeful. "Say yes," Max whispered. "Let me love you forever." Laura's knees buckled, and Max immediately steadied her, his hands gentle on her waist. "Yes," Laura breathed. "Yes, Max. I'll marry you." A relieved, almost disbelieving smile broke across Max's face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Laura stared down at the diamond, the light catching on the delicate band. Max rose to his feet, his hands cupping her face as he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a rushed kiss. It was slow, deliberate, his lips tender against hers as though he was promising her everything with that one touch. Laura's hands slid up to his shoulders, her fingers curling into his jacket as tears slipped down her cheeks. When Max pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, Laura opened her eyes to find him watching her with awe. "I love you," Max whispered. Laura smiled, her heart soaring. "I love you too." Max's arms slid around her waist as he lifted her effortlessly, spinning her in the cool night air. Laura laughed, clutching his shoulders as Max pressed his face into her neck. "You've made me the happiest man in the world," Max said, his voice rough with emotion. Laura touched his cheek. "You've made me feel whole again." Max's gaze darkened with quiet intensity. "Forever," he whispered. "You're mine forever." Laura smiled through her tears. "Forever." Max kissed her again, slow and deep beneath the starlit sky. And for the first time in her life, Laura knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the man who loved her more than anything in the world. The night was wrapped in a soft, romantic haze as Laura stood before the large floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxurious penthouse suite, her heart thudding wildly in her chest. The city lights stretched endlessly beneath her, glittering like scattered diamonds, but Laura couldn't focus on anything beyond the soft rustle of silk brushing against her skin and the quiet sound of Max's footsteps approaching behind her. The wedding had been perfect, a dream come true. The ceremony had taken place in a grand hall adorned with white roses and golden lights, with Max standing at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his tailored black tuxedo. The way he had watched her walk down the aisle, his gaze dark and intense, had nearly stolen the breath from her lungs. His love for her had been etched into every line of his face, and when she had taken his hand, trembling and overwhelmed, Max had leaned down and whispered, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I can't wait to make you mine." Now here she was, his wife. Her heart fluttered at the thought, the weight of the delicate diamond band on her finger grounding her in the surreal truth. She was no longer Laura Mitchell, the woman who had been broken by a man who never deserved her love. She was Laura Charles, married to a man who had pieced her heart back together with nothing but patience, kindness, and unwavering devotion. The sound of Max's footsteps grew louder, and Laura felt the warmth of his presence behind her before his hands slid along her waist, pulling her back against his chest. His breath was warm against her bare shoulder, his lips brushing the sensitive skin there as he whispered, "You're breathtaking." Laura closed her eyes, leaning into him as his hands slid lower, his fingertips teasing the silk of her wedding gown. Max slowly turned her to face him, his stormy gray eyes dark with desire as he cupped her face between his large hands. "Laura," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "do you have any idea how long I've waited for this moment?" Laura's breath hitched as his thumb brushed her lower lip. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were the one, and now that you're mine, I'm never letting you go." His lips crashed down onto hers, and Laura's knees buckled beneath the intensity of his kiss. Max's arms tightened around her waist, lifting her effortlessly as his mouth claimed hers with a desperate hunger that left her dizzy. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, coaxing a soft moan from her throat as his hands slid over the curve of her back. Laura's fingers tangled in his dark hair, her heart racing as Max carried her toward the enormous bed in the center of the room. He lowered her gently onto the satin sheets, his gaze devouring her as he leaned over her, his hands sliding down to the delicate straps of her gown. "May I?" he whispered. Laura's eyes fluttered open, her breath shaky as she nodded. "Yes," she breathed. Max's gaze darkened with a mix of tenderness and raw desire as he slowly slid the straps down her shoulders, exposing the smooth, golden skin beneath. His lips followed the path of the silk, pressing gentle kisses along her collarbone, her shoulder, her trembling throat. Laura shivered beneath his touch, her body arching as Max undressed her with reverence, his hands and mouth worshipping every inch of her skin. When she was bare beneath him, Max's breath hitched. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his hands trailing down her sides. Laura's cheeks flushed under his intense gaze, but Max cupped her chin, tilting her face toward his. "Don't hide from me," he whispered. "You're perfect, every inch of you." His lips found hers again, slower this time, his kiss deep and languid as his hands explored her curves with a tenderness that made Laura's chest ache. Max kissed down her neck, his breath hot against her skin as his hands slid lower, tracing the line of her hips. Laura's breath hitched as Max's mouth moved lower, tasting her skin, leaving a trail of heat in his wake. Her hands curled into the sheets as he worshipped her with lips and hands, his name falling from her lips in a breathless whisper. "Max." His head lifted, his gray eyes dark and intense as he moved over her. "I love you," he said, his voice rough. "I've never loved anyone the way I love you." Laura's heart swelled at the vulnerability in his gaze. "I love you too," she whispered. Max's lips crashed into hers, stealing her breath as he claimed her completely. Their bodies moved together in perfect harmony, each touch and kiss a silent vow of love and devotion. Laura's heart raced as Max's hands tangled in her braids, his mouth claiming her with a possessive intensity that left her trembling. He held her close, his breath ragged as he pressed his forehead against hers. "I'm yours," he whispered. "Forever." Laura's arms slid around his neck, her heart overflowing with emotion. "Forever," she echoed. Max's lips curved into a soft smile as he kissed her again, slow and deep, pouring every ounce of love he felt for her into that one touch. He cradled her against his chest, their bodies entwined beneath the satin sheets as the city lights flickered beyond the windows. Laura rested her head against Max's shoulder, her fingers tracing lazy patterns across his chest as his hands slid down her back, holding her close. "Did I tell you how perfect you are?" Max whispered, pressing a kiss to her hair. Laura smiled sleepily. "You might have mentioned it." Max chuckled, his arms tightening around her. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life telling you." Laura's heart fluttered as Max's hand slid over her hip, his lips finding hers once more. And as they lay together beneath the starlit sky, Laura knew without a doubt that she had finally found the love she had always dreamed of. A love that was real, lasting, and entirely hers. Life with Max was more beautiful than Laura had ever imagined, a dream she never thought could be hers. Yet here she was, living it every single day. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their luxurious penthouse, casting a golden glow over the sleek marble floors and modern furnishings. But Laura's eyes were fixed only on Max. He lay beside her in their enormous bed, his strong arm wrapped protectively around her waist, his dark hair tousled from sleep, and his chiseled face softened by the early light. Laura's heart fluttered as she watched him, his breathing steady, his lips parted slightly. She reached up, brushing her fingers across his jawline, and Max stirred, his stormy gray eyes fluttering open. A sleepy smile curled at the corner of his lips as he pulled her closer, burying his face in the curve of her neck. "Good morning, Mrs. Charles," he murmured against her skin, his voice husky from sleep. Laura smiled, her fingers slipping through his dark hair. "Good morning, Mr. Charles." Max lifted his head, his gaze softening as he cupped her face in his large hands. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. Laura's eyes widened. "Oh God, I forgot it was my birthday," she admitted with a soft laugh. Max's eyes darkened with playful mischief. "Well, I didn't." He sat up, tugging her hand until she followed, and then pulled her to her feet. "Come with me." Confused but curious, Laura allowed him to guide her through the penthouse. Max's bare feet padded softly against the cool marble as he led her toward the massive balcony overlooking the city. When he slid open the glass doors, Laura gasped. The balcony was transformed into a paradise of white roses, twinkling fairy lights, and a table set for two with champagne chilling in a silver bucket. But it wasn't the romantic setup that made Laura's heart skip a beat. It was the large velvet box sitting in the center of the table. Max led her toward it, his fingers entwining with hers as he picked up the box and held it out to her. "Open it," he said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Laura hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribcage as she slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a gold key on a delicate chain. Confused, she lifted her gaze to Max. "What's this?" Max's smile widened. "It's the key to your new home," he said softly. Laura's breath hitched. "What?" Max took the key from her hand, slipping it around her neck. "I bought you a penthouse," he said, his voice rough with emotion, overlooking the city with floor-to-ceiling windows, a sunlit reading nook, and a walk-in closet bigger than this room. Laura's eyes filled with tears. "Max, you deserve everything beautiful, Laura," Max said, his hands sliding down her arms. "And if you'll let me, I'm going to spend the rest of my life giving you exactly that." Laura's throat tightened as she stared at him, the love in his eyes stealing her breath. "Max, I know you don't need it," he interrupted gently. "But I want you to have it. I want you to wake up every day surrounded by beauty, comfort, and love. I want you to have everything you were once denied." Laura's eyes shimmered with tears as Max pulled her into his arms, his lips brushing her forehead. "You healed me, Laura. You showed me what love really means. Now let me give you the life you deserve." Laura's tears spilled over as Max kissed her, slow and tender, pouring every ounce of his devotion into that one touch. When he pulled back, Laura laughed softly, brushing her hands over his jaw. "I don't care where we live, Max. As long as I have you, I have everything I need." Max's eyes darkened with emotion. "You have me," he whispered. "Forever." They spent the morning curled together on the balcony, sipping champagne and laughing as Max fed her bites of chocolate-covered strawberries. He watched her with such intensity, such tenderness, that Laura felt her heart swell to the point of bursting. Max couldn't keep his hands off her, tracing lazy circles along her wrist, pressing soft kisses to her temple, and tucking loose braids behind her ear as they talked about everything and nothing at all. Later that afternoon, Max whisked her away in his sleek black sports car, driving toward a private beach where a candlelit dinner was waiting beneath the setting sun. Laura's dress billowed around her ankles as Max led her barefoot across the sand, his arms secure around her waist. They sat beneath a canopy of soft white fabric, the sound of waves crashing against the shore mingling with the soft strains of violin music. Max reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Tell me what you want, Laura," he said. "Anything. I'll give you the world." Laura smiled, brushing her thumb over his knuckles. "I already have everything I want." Max's gaze softened. "Marrying you was the best decision I've ever made," he whispered. Laura's heart melted as he leaned across the table, brushing his lips over hers. "And making you happy is the only thing I'll ever want." They danced beneath the stars, Max's arms wrapped around her waist as he swayed her gently in time with the music. Laura leaned her head against his chest, her heart thudding in perfect sync with his. "I love you," she whispered. Max's arms tightened around her. "I love you more." That night, Max carried her to bed, his kisses growing deeper, his touch more possessive. He worshipped her with slow, aching tenderness, his lips and hands igniting her skin. Laura's breath hitched as Max whispered her name, his voice rough with emotion. "Mine," he said. "Always." Laura's hands curled into his back as he claimed her completely, the sound of their breathing mingling with the soft night breeze. When it was over, Max cradled her against his chest, his lips brushing her hair. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Charles," he whispered. Laura smiled, tears of happiness pooling in her eyes as she drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had not only saved her, but given her the life of joy and fulfillment she had always dreamed of. Laura's past was no longer a haunting shadow lingering over her heart. It was now a distant memory, fading further with each passing day as Max filled every corner of her life with love, warmth, and a sense of belonging she had once believed was impossible to find. The pain Scott had inflicted upon her, the cruel words, the humiliations, the betrayals, had once weighed her down so heavily that she thought she would never recover. But Max had erased those scars with his unwavering devotion and tenderness. Every morning, Laura woke up wrapped in Max's strong arms, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek, his heartbeat a soothing rhythm that reminded her she was safe, loved, and cherished. Max would always wake before her, brushing soft kisses across her forehead and down the slope of her neck, his warm breath sending shivers through her as he whispered, "Good morning, my love." His gray eyes would soften when she stirred, and he'd smile at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, because, to Max, she was. Laura would stretch beneath the silk sheets, her long braids spilling over her shoulders as Max's hand traced the length of her spine. "Stay with me today," he'd murmur against her ear, but Laura would laugh, brushing her lips over his jaw. "You say that every day." And Max would grin, rolling her beneath him, his body pressing against hers in a way that made her heart flutter. "Because I mean it every day." Their mornings were filled with playful kisses and whispered laughter as Max reluctantly let her out of bed, only to follow her into the shower, where his hands would slide down her wet skin, his mouth trailing over her collarbone, until Laura was breathless beneath him. Their connection was deeper than anything Laura had ever known. A bond forged not only from passion but from trust, understanding, and unwavering love. Max made her feel beautiful in a way that went beyond the physical. He saw her soul, recognized her strength, and adored her for the woman she had become. He never once brought up her painful past, but Laura knew he understood how far she had come, and that made her love him even more. After breakfast, Max would drive her to the office, even though Laura insisted she could manage on her own. "I like being the one who gets to see you off," he'd say, his hand resting possessively on her thigh as he navigated the city streets in his sleek black sports car. Max would walk her inside the towering glass skyscraper, his hand at the small of her back, ignoring the curious stares from his employees as he leaned down to press a lingering kiss to her lips before letting her go. "Have lunch with me," he'd say, his eyes dark with longing, and Laura would smile, brushing her fingers over his jaw. "We had lunch together yesterday." Max's gaze would darken. "And the day before that," he'd add. "And the day before that." Laura would laugh, her heart fluttering as Max kissed her again before heading toward his office. Her workdays were fulfilling, but it was Max who gave her life meaning. He would send her flowers in the middle of meetings, his notes always making her blush. "Thinking of you, missing you already, counting the hours until I have you in my arms again." At night, Max would take her hand and pull her into the city lights, driving her to elegant rooftop restaurants or quiet seaside resorts where they'd sip wine beneath the stars. Max adored spoiling her. Designer gowns, diamond bracelets, luxurious vacations. But Laura knew it wasn't the material things that mattered. It was the way Max's eyes softened when he looked at her, the way his thumb brushed across her knuckles when they held hands, the way he held her against his chest at night as though he never wanted to let her go. "You're everything to me," Max would say, his voice rough with emotion as Laura lay beneath him, his lips brushing over her skin. Laura would stroke his hair, feeling her heart swell. "You saved me, Max," she'd whisper. Max's eyes would darken, his hand sliding down her side. "No," he'd say, "you saved me." They built a future together, one moment at a time. Max was fiercely protective of her, his possessiveness showing in the way he'd curl his arm around her waist at events, his expression hardening any time another man so much as glanced at her. But Laura didn't mind. She loved knowing that Max wanted her, needed her, belonged to her as much as she belonged to him. They bought a house by the beach where Laura would wake to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, Max's arm draped over her waist as he pressed lazy kisses to the back of her neck. They'd spend mornings walking barefoot along the sand, Max's hand entwined with hers as they talked about their future. A future Max had promised would be filled with nothing but love and happiness. "Do you want kids?" Max asked one evening as they sat beneath the stars, his head resting in Laura's lap as her fingers combed through his hair. Laura's heart thudded painfully. "Yes," she whispered, "one day." Max lifted his head, his gray eyes gleaming beneath the moonlight. "Then we'll have them." Laura smiled, tears burning at the corners of her eyes as Max sat up, pulling her into his lap. "You've given me everything," she whispered, brushing her fingers over his jaw. "Love, security, happiness." Max's expression softened, his thumb brushing over her bottom lip. "And I'll give you more," he promised. "As long as I'm breathing, Laura, I will give you everything." That night, Max made love to her beneath the stars, his touch so gentle, so reverent, that Laura's heart shattered and mended all at once. The past was gone, the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, all washed away beneath Max's hands, replaced by a love so pure and so consuming that Laura no longer felt the scars Scott had left behind. The future was bright not because of the wealth or luxury Max provided, but because of the way he loved her, with a depth and sincerity that Laura knew would never fade. "I love you," Laura whispered as Max's hand curled around hers beneath the sheets. Max smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you more," he said. And as Laura drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had not only saved her but taught her how to love again, she knew without a doubt that this was the life she was always meant to have.